guess it's 7 o'clock. Let's do this. Hi, welcome to the Bumbleberry Theater. And so right off the bat, thanks Stan, right there, this is the theater, for his donating his time and his amazing theater for us. Thank you, Stan. This is the 4th annual Voices for the Red West workshop, and this is something that Kirsten and I cooked up maybe 5 or 6 years ago in an unfinished building, trying to figure out how to get a fire lit for Zion Canyon Mesa, how to get something going so that people would start noticing us. And here we are 4 years later. We're open. We've hosted 60 artists, writers, painters, scientists from all over the world already. And we're off to a great start. We have 4 units. We have an art studio. Louise is here. If you feel like donating to Louise, we're still looking for $4 million. So she takes Venmo and other things. Generally, we start with an acknowledgement, but what I like to do instead is just read a little something about the Southern Paiute. And this came at the end of an interview where Richard Arnold from Pahrump was very hesitant to talk about Pua, which is power or energy. And he finally, I had listened to enough other people talk about it that I'd gotten it that wrong enough that he felt compelled to straighten me out, which is how a lot of the interviews went. So at the end of his talk about power, he said this: I've been in places where you hear the songs. They are there. It's the mountains that are singing to you. I've seen lots of things in my life, heard lots, and you could hear those songs just like we're talking here. Once again, our culture is so deep, so holistic. And if people would consider all these elements, it really makes sense. It really does. It's there. It's there if you're in tune or in sync with that stuff, and you know it without a doubt. It's very alive. It's very well, and it connects us all. Richard Arnold. So, first of all, I'd like to thank Stan again, the town of Springdale. We've got the mayor and the town council member here. Thank you, Barb. Thank you, Randy. The reason these are free is because of people like the Washington County Rat Tax people. Finally, I didn't know. Thank you, Washington County Recreation, Arts and Parks, for your generosity. A local, James Walsh, also donated heavily towards this. We have 2 board members here. Our chair, Louise, is here, and Danielle Dabrowski, thank you for coming. There's, if you look at the big hairy white bush back there, that's Craig Childs, and he'll be performing tomorrow night with Greg Ostock, same time, same place. So come back tomorrow night at 7 for the Wild Dark. And let's see, Tom Springdale, James Walsh, Washington Parks, Stan, Tory House Press in the house, right? And did I forget anybody?
Logan.
All of them. Everybody is in the canyon.
Everybody?
Everybody in the canyon supports.
Oh, and thank you all for coming out tonight. I'd like to turn it over to Will, that's you, Will Rabin, Neville Rabin. And he's the co-editor of Tory House Press. Ladies and gentlemen, Tory House Press, and you will introduce the rest. Thank you so much.
Logan, thank you. Thank you all for being here. This is an absolute highlight of our year, and we're thrilled to be back with a phenomenal group of writers and teachers and unbelievable crew hanging out both up at Zion Canyon Mesa and at Cable Mountain Lodge. So a big thank you to Cable Mountain Lodge for their hospitality and the work that they do to help make all of this happen, and to Zion Canyon Mesa for their partnership over the last 3 years. And this is the first year that we actually have one of our groups up there. We had outgrown just Cable Mountain, and so Pam is queen of a different mountain and ended up with her fiction writers up at CCM. I am thrilled to be able to introduce Kirsten Johanna Allen, who is the co-founder and my co-executive director and the publisher of Tory House Press, who is going to be moderating a conversation and enjoying, as much as the rest of us, getting to hear from these 3 wonderful humans. First up, we have Amy Irvine, who is a teacher and explorer, and I am in her workshop, and so right now she is an extraordinarily intimidating, talented human. And she is the author of Trespass, Desert Cabal, Airmail, co-authored with Pam Houston, and a new book coming out this November, I believe, Almost Animal. Jake Speets is a professor at the University of Oklahoma and the third poet laureate of the Navajo Nation. His debut poetry collection, Eyes Bottled Dark with a Mouthful of Flowers, won the National Poetry Series, and his second book, which all of us who have read his first book have been looking forward to for a very long time, doesn't come out until March 24th from Milkweed, and as far as we know, tonight is the first night people are able to purchase it. So, have Jake sign all the things. You're going to stay up way too late reading poetry, and there is not a better way to spend an evening. And Pam Houston, with apologies to her marvelous dog, Bodhi, who is in the car. Pam is a professor at the MFA program at the at IAIA, which I'm going to not be, it's been a very long day, and I'm not going to get the acronym correct, so I am not going to try. And is the author of books including Cowboys Are My Weakness, Without Exception, co-authored Airmail with Amy Irvine, and the forthcoming in September, Animals Taught Me Everything. And with that, I will turn it over to Kirsten. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Will. And thank you, Springdale. It is always such a joy to be here at the doorstep of Zion. What a spectacular, spectacular place. I think for each of us, we need to be kind of close to these mics for them to really do their job. It's a total pleasure for me to be here in conversation with these amazing, look what good students they are, right? They're the best, good teachers and good students. As Will said, I'm Kirsten Johanna Allen, co-founder and co-executive director at Torrey House Press. At Torrey House Press, we are publishing books at the intersection of literary arts and environmental advocacy. We are telling stories about our relationship with the natural world and the people and the cultures and the places and the plants and the animals that engage us as human beings. Tonight, I'm so excited to talk with each of these three super fantastic people. I wanted to talk about kind of a progression through your careers, through your writing careers. And I want to start with, Pam, I want to start with you. What motivated or inspired you to write your very first book way back in the day?
Well, the first thing I want to say is Institute of American Indian Arts. Not to call Will out, but I want to say it because it's such an important place to me and to many other people in this room, and it's an astonishing art school that is elevating Native arts of all kinds, but in my little MFA corner of it, elevating, rewriting the literary landscape with some of the most amazing books, including Jake, who's a graduate from there. And it was in danger of having all of its funding cut because of the current administration, and a lot of New Mexico people got behind making that not happen. But it's in a precarious situation because of the current administration. So I just want to say its name, and I want to say it's very, very important that it maintains its funding and that it keeps making a Indigenous community for many, many artists and writers. And here. It has also given me the education of my life, being welcomed into that community. In any case, what made me, and then on a completely different topic, what made me write a book about all my bad boyfriends? Cowboys Are My Weakness was my graduate school thesis. It was my thesis at the University of Utah, and where I went to graduate school. And boy, I was writing I had come out west from New Jersey. I'm a proud New Jerseyan from a long time ago, and I came out west and I was so impressed, blown away by the western landscape. It was the first time I really felt like a writer. I had been pretending at writing as an undergrad, but the western landscape in the Colorado Plateau in particular just blew my mind in a way that made me want to make better sentences about it. And being quite young, I was about 26 at the time I started writing that book, and I confused being in love with the land with being in love with like unavailable river guides, and that is what happened in Cowboys Are My Weakness. And so I wrote a lot of stories about unavailable men in the wilderness and me trying to keep up with them. And it, came out at a good moment, and it struck a chord, and it was the first years of real female river guides and things like that. So then that book gave me the rest of my career, essentially. I mean, I had to write some more books, but the popularity of that book paved the way for me to be a writer for the rest of my life, which is sort of a miraculous thing.
Yeah. Amy, I want to go to you next. What motivated or inspired you to write Trespass?
It also had to do with unavailable men. Both my father and my husband. And I had to make sense of that. But it really was also about being a wilderness activist in Utah as a 6th generation Mormon from the most original of Utah's colonizers, who didn't settle the land but unsettled it entirely, and trying to make sense of that. And I had access to some pretty phenomenal family journals that I dove into after my father committed suicide on New Year's Eve 2000, and that really made me want to understand land and family to the best that I could with the information I had. And because I didn't, there's a lot about the men, because there's so much history written about them and romanticized and mythologized. I come from sort of an illustrious, one of Brigham Young's henchmen who was really bad to my great-great-great-grandmother, his 3rd wife. But I just really didn't delve into the women. I was so focused on trying to figure out my father's life and his impact on me and why I married a man just like him. And all those connections, and slowly understanding that my relationship to public lands was actually changing the more I dove into that, the family mythology of our land. And so much more that years later, having learned more, I had to write a 2nd book about it, but we'll get to that.
Love it, love it. Jake, Eyes Bottle Dark with a Mouthful of Flowers. Why did you write this book? What was your motivation? What inspired you? What's the story of this first book of yours?
I mean, I don't think there's a theme here, but no, you let me know. No, Eyes Bottle Dark was my graduate thesis as well. I was working on it while I was at IAIA. So Pam has heard very early versions of the poems, actually, of that particular book. And I think the motivation behind the book itself is the cover. So on the cover, for those who don't know the story, on the cover is a Richard Avedon portrait of my uncle, Benson James. And the portrait was taken a year before Benson was murdered in a border town called Gallup, New Mexico, which I'm pretty sure a lot of you might be familiar with. And having grown up around Gallup and in Gallup, that was my inspiration, is to write about that experience and write about the experiences of so many other, particularly Native men, but of course all Native people in most border towns deal with a particular kind of racism and violence in those towns and cities. And so for me, it was about trying to honor that history, talk about the portrait in a way, and sort of talk about and think through a masculinity that I feel like I grew up around. And it's one that's really beautiful, one that's really vulnerable, but of course one that is so closely attached to violence. And I wanted to find a way to reconcile that and negotiate all of it. And so Eyes Wide Dark is the result of all of that.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Jake, you're just about to launch this wonderful, wonderful second book. Woohoo! We're so excited to have it here tonight. What changed, if anything, your motivations, your inspirations between your first book and Horses?
A lot's changed, actually. Well, first, I think sorry, it's taking me long. I haven't thought about poetry in so long. Because I've been working on a novel for the past year, working on redraft for the past year. Sent it off to my editors last month. So I'm like, wait, poetry? Wait, what? And I finished Horses actually in 2023, so that was 3 years ago almost now. So this book already feels like an older book. So getting back into it, I feel like it's really interesting. But one of the things looking at it now is definitely the kind of durability of the lines. So longer lines here, there's longer poems. I wanted there to be this kind of longer space where I can delve into some of the things that I purposely sort of withheld in Eyes Wide Dark. This is definitely a little bit more narrative. I move into the sentence a lot more. I feel like there's a maturity here as a writer myself, because I wrote it primarily by alone, whereas Eyes Wide Dark was written in community at IAI in Santa Fe. Horses was written entirely on my own. There were only a handful of readers who read early drafts of the book, and even then I didn't ask for feedback per se, but just questions that they might have had. So for me, this book feels more like a debut because it's a book that I sort of really put a lot of myself in it, and paid really close attention to the source material here, and it wasn't not to say that Eyes Wide Dark is not me, but this feels like it's closer to who I am as a poet, at least right now. Who knows?
I relate to that situation where when a book comes out and as a publisher and as an editor, I also haven't touched it in forever. So when a book actually gets between the covers, it's like it's brand new to me too. It's like, wow, this is so exciting. What is it about now? Yeah, I totally get that. I totally get that. Jake, as you're working on a novel, the poetry was a while. Are there different kinds of demotivators or blocks that you've experienced that are different between when you have your poetry brain and when you have your fiction brain going?
I think most of prose is a block in and of itself. Prose was an entirely different machine, especially fiction. My only sort of experience in fiction was, listening to the novelists and essayists at IAI and the different craft panels that they've had. So for me, it was all a block, and it was all just an uphill sort of journey. But I really actually sort of enjoyed it. I was going through it. I of course complained a lot and agonized and
Writing is easy.
but now that I think back, I think it was definitely a learning experience for me as a writer, and I don't think there was necessarily demotivators. I think it's just a matter of again durability, like focusing and having so much trust in yourself as a writer, having so much trust in the story and the language of the page. So I feel like it was a interesting entanglement that I found myself in.
Wow. Pam, how about you? As your career has spanned several books and fiction and nonfiction, essays, memoir, a lot of different things. What kind of blocks or demotivators have changed for you over time, if at all?
Two things I would say. And this is all fairly recent. I entered what I think of as my no fucks left to give 60s. And it's a wonderful place to be. I am the no fucks left to give 60s. I'm 64, but something happened in my late 50s, and I think it corresponds with a lot of the stuff that's happened politically, but I'm not afraid, and I'm not trying to prove, not exactly, I think on some level we're always trying to prove, but I'm trying to prove so much less than I used to, which was a big demotivator, and it's gone. It's really gone, and I think some of that's hormonal, and I think some of it's just wisdom and trying to be a good elder, It's a thing I've learned at IAIA, is what it means to be an elder, and I'm trying to be a good one, and that translates onto the page as like telling a kind of truth and not trying to be anybody I'm not, It took me a long time to get here. But the other thing, I'm not answering your question because I'm talking about motivators rather than demotivators, which seem like a happier subject. But the other thing that's happening to me right now, and this is going to sound like I'm pandering, but I'm not. The last two books, the three books, counting the one that's coming, is all with Torrey House, and I've said this to many people, and I've probably said it to you, but getting out of New York and getting away from that publishing machine, which is not kind to humans and artists. It can go well for a while, and it did for me. Went well for about 25 years, and then it stopped going well, and I'm having so much fun writing now because you're who gets it, you're who receives it. So, and this is real, like I'm writing, and instead of making a list in my head of all the ways I'm gonna be, like not just reprimanded, but ridiculed for what I'm writing, I just think, Kirsten's gonna like that one. It's a completely different experience. And in this new book, there's a 60-page essay which ends the book. It's called "A Horse Will Not Make a Suicide," which is something they say in Iceland. And I didn't really think it was going to be 60 pages long. I knew it was going to be long, but then it turned out to be 60 pages long. And even then I was like, there's no way she's gonna go for this. Like, I turned that book in and I was like, she's gonna be like, okay, Pam, I know you really like Icelandic horses, but 60 pages, and and so we had our little meeting, our editorial meeting, and Kirsten had lots of good thoughts for me, and I was writing them all down, and then she's like, okay, well, I guess we're done. And I was like, wait, like, you're just gonna let me have that 60-page essay where all I do is get up every morning and get on another horse? And she's like, yeah, that's what we do. That's what Pam does. She gets up in the morning, like, where am I gonna go riding with Pam
I
today?
couldn't get enough of it, And I don't hear about horses that much.
Anyway, I'm glad I get to say this to you in public, but like, it's a completely different thing to sit down and write for someone who is going to receive my work with enthusiasm and goodwill. It's a completely different thing than I've had in my life, and it wasn't awful. I had a good experience at W.W. Norton until it wasn't good anymore. So I have no regrets, but I'm so happy to have found this situation that makes me want to sit down and write.
Thank you, Pam. Amy, you are about to come out with a book that you've been working on for a long time.
talk to us a little bit about what's changed for you since you started Trespass, since you did Desert Cabal and Airmail with Pam, and now you've got animals.
Yeah, imagine that.
I know.
Pam and I realized just recently that we both had books coming out in October and November that both had animal in the title, and so we were joining forces and doing our book tour together, which will be the Apocalyptic Book Tour Part 2, because this truly was the Apocalyptic Book Tour. It was Torrey House Press. I was pretty traumatized by the end of Trespass, and I don't mean that in some sort of indulgent way. I just feel like I opened closets of skeletons that I didn't have language for, I didn't know what to do with, and so there wasn't a lot of resolution at the end of Trespass for me, and I was still married to the guy that I shouldn't have been married to, and I had a really sick kid. So the easy answer would be the long, difficult journey with a child with severe epilepsy, and then myself getting long COVID early on, riding horses in Mongolia. The horses didn't give it to me, but I went there to heal, thinking it was going to be this whole, and then I was sick for 5 years. But the truth was, along the way, in all that hardship, I stumbled into this response to Edward Abbey, which New York would have laughed at. And Kristen didn't think twice about publishing it, and publishing it in like 3 months, which is unheard of. Like I was your first fast job, and then I said, and how about Airmail next? And the same thing happened with Airmail. Pam and I started writing letters, not knowing one another ever, which was so weird because we move in similar circles, we share so many interests, and we were living on either side of the continental divide. We could have walked to one another's houses. And so we started this letter writing thing at the beginning of lockdown for Orion magazine, and it saved us. Like, it really literally saved us. We were so afraid and wondering how to help the people that were so much more vulnerable than we were, and feeling these dark forces starting to gather. And so anyway, the letter writing became a real solace, and then we were like, we have something here. Hey, Kirsten, can you publish this before Election Day so we can go on book tour? And again, Torrey House pulled out all the stops to make another book happen to meet the moment.
In 3 months.
In 3 months. Again, New York would have laughed at this if we pitched
Amy
this idea.
called me on a Sunday in May and said, it's May 2020. We've got a book, and it really needs to come out this fall.
And
I
it
was just
did.
like, are you aware of the pandemic? I think there's an election coming up.
And
We're
there
trying to
was
be
no
able to do a
paper,
book.
right?
And there was no,
There was
yeah.
no paper. There was still paper then, but like the printers had shut down for a while.
Yeah.
It's like, that's a crazy idea. And then, she told me, she spent about 90 seconds really kind of explaining the project. I was like, oh, yeah, I guess we need to publish Airmail. We'll figure it out.
So getting that kind of support and like falling into projects about things you deeply care about, and having a publisher and editor respond that way, it really helped me finally finish this book, which sort of picks up where Trespass left off. And instead this time I'm reckoning with the Mormon women. And I had to look really hard for their stories, and it's a tricky story because not only were they incredibly oppressed as plural wives of these great Mormon patriarchs that held an amazing amount of entitlement and committed, a lot of acts of brutality against the land and many, many species, and of course the people who already lived there. And so I just had to imagine these lives and piece together these little bits and pieces to see what it was like to be a woman out there alone on a homestead. Well, the husband was gone a lot, and then I realized, I'm living this life at home with an absent husband and this child, and I have all these animals, and I'm living just like my foremothers. And reckoning with that was actually the traumatic piece, which really wasn't about me at all. It was really about this legacy of violence and control, and how that lived on through my mother's and my father's lineage, and how it was being expressed and repeated in me in multiple ways. And just, I was having a really hard time finding white writers that were actually exploring their own genealogy in this way. And all my black and brown writer friends are saying, yeah, we need you guys to help with this. Like, everybody's carrying this legacy. Like, can you be a part of the solution? And so the book just about cost me everything. I mean, it really literally cost me everything. And in the end, I gained everything. So it was worth it. So that book is almost animal. And you'll see it on display and when Pam and I go on book tour together with our animal books and our dogs in tow.
That's gonna be
Just
great.
briefly, the reason we call it the Apocalyptic Book Tour for Airmail is, okay, so it was September of 2020. Like, lockdown was kind of over, but nobody wanted to talk to anybody face to face. We were driving all over Utah, Colorado, other places, and everything was on fire that September. And at one point, we thought we were actually lighting fires with our tailpipe because it seemed like everywhere we went, the forest burst into flames. And people would come, all our readings were outside, and people would come with goggles and masks because of the smoke and COVID. So it was like the weird, and here we are selling books out of the trunk of the car. Like, the whole thing was and we were in 2 cars because we were afraid to ride together because I think we were still washing our mail at that point.
We were still washing our
So, like,
groceries, carrying air filters.
it was, we would carry air filters into the hotels. The whole thing was absolute bonkers, but we had so much fun that we decided we have to do it again, because
And
we had
we
these
targeted-
simultaneous books.
And we targeted the wealthy mountain towns in
Yeah.
Colorado, Utah, and a lot of people that weren't that affected by the pandemic. And we're just like, what's the big deal? We're still going to Pilates. And we were like, well, there's an election coming up. And I remember that woman in Park City, she said, or Telluride said, well, my Republican neighbors are really nice people. I don't understand what the problem is. Like, it's gonna be okay. And we were like, no, it's not okay out there. Like, people are really suffering. And so we did, like, rally people to vote. Like, it really matters. You have to vote. I know it's comfy here in your little Box Canyon town, but the world's not okay. Will you please mask? Will you please take care? And it felt like we were doing something. I think that was the best thing. Was that we felt like we were doing something.
Yeah, as publisher and editor of Airmail, I mean, the why was like, we need to connect, and I mean, you were connecting with these letters and then connecting with community, and it's
Through the goggles.
through the goggles and stuff, and the ash, yeah, totally. I want to ask you each a little bit about your current books. And kind of, you've touched on some of this, but digging deep a little bit about why did you write this book? And why did you write this book now? And Jake, I guess you've got a book in progress and you have a book baby that's being born right as we speak. So, either of those projects that kind of sing to you, why did you write this next book now?
I mean, my instinct answer is just like, why not? But that's not a good answer. I think, horses, just like Eyes Bottle Dark. So Eyes Bottle Dark, the sort of triggering thing that helped the book come together was the portrait. And for horses, it was the exact same thing. So in 2018, there was a horse die-off on the Navajo Nation. So nearly 200 horses were found dead in northern Arizona. They were found dead on a dried-up stock pond. And the images, the pictures of those horses in this circle was just as haunting as looking at the Abaddon portrait. And so from there began this long research project about climate change on the Navajo Nation and the ways in which it is felt now and currently. And so also looking at my own sort of upbringing, so I learned a lot about sand dune migration and dust pneumonia, and I learned the way that Like how snow is so important to the Navajo Nation. And so for me, it became just a meditation about climate from there and trying to understand what was happening. All the while, right, I wanted to have this long conversation with other poets as well, specifically poets like, Joy Harjo. She Had Some Horses, one of my favorite books. Lucy Tapahanso, Nia Francisco. They have books that are called Blue Horses Rush In. And of course, when I finished the book, and I finished the book while I was doing a residency at the John Grisham House in Oxford, Mississippi. And I was out there just being my partner and my dogs out in the middle of nowhere in Mississippi, finishing this book. And Patti Smith's Horses was an album that I listened to, pretty much every day. Just like, let me just get through it. And so I feel like I'm really interested in trying to maybe maintain a sense of history with books like Joy Harjo. So when it came to my agents were like, how would you feel about a novel, or how do you feel about prose? I pitched this idea of a novel inspired, sort of like really borrowing from N. Scott Mombaday's House Made of Dawn. And so my novel is called Dawn House, and it's a direct, I guess not, I don't want to say direct response, but it does deal with House Made of Dawn, sort of, but told within the Navajo Nation of today's climate, and really just trying to honor that particular legacy of Native literature, specifically through Mombaday. I feel like Mombaday, Harjo, like these writers were standing on their shoulders, and so I really wanted to pay to honor that. Right? That I'm not here. Or I'm here because of them, right? And so I really wanted to just pay really close attention to that as I was writing these next two books. And I think the primary question that I had, I think going to both Horses and the novel, was, how do I write about joy? given that Eyes Bottle Darkness is such a really hard book to get through, because of dealing with all the things that happen in Gallup, New Mexico. My main question was, how do I write about something that's happy? Horses, of course, isn't that, but I think it's a stepping stone. And then the novel itself is another extension of that question about joy and happiness, but how do we really feel those particular things? Yeah.
Love that. Pam. Panels. Animals taught me everything.
That's Will's title.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really
Why did you want to write this book, and why now?
Yeah. Well, I too had long COVID, and at one point, when I was very sick, I had moved to Santa Fe because I just couldn't handle the altitude at my own house. I know Santa Fe is thought of as high, but it's 2,000 feet lower than my house. So I went to Santa Fe because I was seeing an acupuncturist there who was really helping me with my symptoms. And one day she said, your kidney pulses are weaker than anyone's I've ever felt who wasn't in the hospital actively dying. And I need you to go home and find a reason to live. And so I drove home and I booked a 7-day horse ride with a loose herd across Iceland. I had been to Iceland and ridden a horse for an hour, but it wasn't a thing. I'm a horse person, but it wasn't a thing I had done. And I booked it like 9 months in advance because I thought, well, I'll either be dead or I'll be better. And because when she said reason to live, I thought, riding from one end of Iceland to the other with a herd of 75 loose horses seemed like the best I could do. So, and I did go on that ride, and I survived it barely because I was still so weak, but the horses were kind to me, and everybody was kind to me, and it became my late in life love, and so all of that is to say, I knew, as a very young person, that animals brought me joy, that animals were joy in my life, always, even when it was complicated. And by the way, Joy Harjo's book, when I was a young person, was so important to me because that book made a sort of sense to me that I wasn't seeing in white writers or in a lot of the poets that I was reading in grad school or whatever. In any case, and so I thought, yeah, like people are hard right now, and I'm gonna write about animals. And the other thing I said is after Without Exception, which is a book that I wrote with Kirsten for the 2024 election and all the women's reproductive rights initiatives that were on the ballot, I thought, okay, I can just stop writing about politics and I'm gonna write about animals. Well, it didn't turn out that way because the animal book is, obviously it's hard to write any time, but especially in this time without becoming somewhat political. But I, the main reason is because literally animals taught me everything. That's something I said out loud to Will, and Will said, hey, wait, that might be the title. And I said, do you think it's literary enough? And Will said, I think we're past that. I think we're in a state right now where we don't have to worry about it. I said, you are so right. You're so right about that. And it was just one of my favorite conversations with Will. And he was exactly right. And it is true that animals have taught me everything. They've taught me how to love. They've taught me how to die. They've taught me how to work. They've taught me how to be with the dying. They've taught me how to find joy when things are shitty. They've taught me how to be in the present moment. They've taught me how to work, so many things. And I have finally, again, age, time, I have finally stopped being a little embarrassed by that. Or at the very least, I have finally started being able to say that out loud with gusto. I have learned how to be a better human from animals, many of them wild, many of them domesticated. I can't think who I'd be without them.
Love it. Do you want to give us a little snippet?
Yeah, I'll give you a little snippet. This is the moment that the title of that last incredibly long essay comes from. So at this moment, I'm on a 4-day ride in a canyon called Thorsmork. Last year, Iceland experienced the wettest summer in recent history, and by the time we got to Thorsmork, the several rivers we needed to cross in order to get to our hut near the head of the canyon were in serious flood. Icelandics, and when I say Icelandics, I mean horses. Icelandics are famously brave river crossers. Even when the water is deep and tumbling, even edged with ice, even with a frightened human on their back who was trying and sometimes failing to help them keep their balance. Nevertheless, the 2024 conditions were so extreme, our guide Samuel said any of our 4 major crossings had the potential to turn the tour around, especially the final one. Samuel would line us up in the order he wanted on the rocky bank of each river, then plunge in with his own horse, and we'd hold our breaths as they took one careful step at a time toward the middle, at which point, satisfied, Samuel would wave for us to follow. The loose herd, we're riding all this time with 75 loose horses, the loose herd was left to take care of themselves at these crossings, which they mostly did, because no horse wants to be left alone on the wrong side of a raging river. A horse will not make a suicide, Samuel shouted to all of us on the bank of the 4th most dangerous and final crossing. He said it the way one might say, to each his own, or what goes around comes around. And I wondered if it was actually an Icelandic saying, left over from those years when the car arrived in Iceland and the Icelandic people temporarily abandoned their best friends. What I knew for certain is that the phrase would live on repeat in my head forever. Long COVID laid me low in 2020 and 2021, and the cruelty those running my country were enacting on humans, animals, and the earth herself since then had laid me even lower. but I felt pure joy each time my plane touched down in Iceland, which amped itself up to ecstasy each time I sat on the back of a horse. You must stay with your horse no matter what happens in the river, Samuel continued. If you stay with your horse, I guarantee he will get you safely to the other side. Amen, I sang in my heart and my spirit, and possibly even out loud. Amen, 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 amen. We all know Samuel is afraid of this particular crossing. He's talked about it nonstop since before we left the barn. We don't know if he's afraid for himself or us or his horse or his job. We have no way to measure this danger against all the other dangers Icelandic terrain serves up. We watch him ask his horse to take the first step into this final river, which might be more correctly called a torrent, pitched at an angle we would generally call a cascade. And we watch his horse hesitate not 1/2 second before plunging into his chest. And Samuel is right. Not one of our horses make a suicide. And midstream, both hands sunk deep into my horse's mane, grabbing his belly with every leg muscle I have ever cultivated, I feel a smile pushing itself from ear to ear and a soaring in my chest that can only be called glee. We come out drenched to our necks, what with all the splashing, and now there is the crossing back the next day to think of. But the horses seem as pleased with themselves as we are with them, and we find ourselves bathed in endorphins of high risk and reward, trust, respect, and teamwork.
Amy, I'm going to go with follow up a little bit on what you said about Almost Animal. You talked about writing about the women in your life, kind of in response to trespass being a little more a response to men in your life. Tell us more a little bit about why that felt so important to you and now. And then give us a little snippet if you got a snippet.
Well, we have such a tradition of erasing women in this country in particular, whether it's missing and murdered Indigenous women or the women in the Epstein files that we should just believe rather than needing to read the files. I knew that there was a whole story there that I needed to understand about the women I came from because my reaction to having a child was easily diagnosed as postpartum depression and even postpartum psychosis, which incredibly went undiagnosed for many years, despite me asking for help. But I didn't think it was just that. I had this sense the night that I was in the hospital in which I'd been born in Salt Lake. My mother was flying from England where she was living. She'd remarried years after my father. They'd split years ago. But she was living in England with her second husband. And her mother died the night my daughter was born. And we started a new mythology immediately, which was, oh, Grandma Blaisdell hung up the new baby in the ether and gave her an earful, and sure enough, this baby came in profoundly troubled and all kinds of problems. It took me 9 years to get the epilepsy diagnosed, mostly because the doctors thought I was a little high-strung. And so I was like, whatever I'm carrying and whatever is dysregulating me that prevents me from caring and co-regulating the way any animal, mammals in particular, co-regulate their young. I was unable to do it, and I needed to understand what kind of women I came from, because I just didn't feel, it felt like this was, that this went back generations. I just had a feeling. So I went looking for those stories, and I was horrified at what I found. I was really, the LDS Church has actually made public far more documents than I had access to for the first book. And of course I was looking with fresh eyes. And the women I come from were all plural wives, low on the totem pole, who live literally almost like animals. So part of the title is Almost Animal in terms of women becoming mothers and that whole process of reducing us to almost animals, particularly in a patriarchal society like that. And then there was also the redemption of that, like what better thing to be than an animal and be in an animal body. And so to find my way, to speak to what Jake is saying, like, how do I find the joy in the story? How do I find a way through? And so that's what I really doubled down on trying to tell it.
Wow, give us a little bit.
So this is that night in labor in the LDS hospital. Again, the same floor I was born on, under completely different circumstances because my mother had them give her anesthesia and amnesiac drugs. So she said I woke up and I had no idea who you were and why I was entrusted with you. So that was the beginning of our disconnect, which I passed on immediately to my kid when they were born, and that was really disturbing because I couldn't understand it. That first night of pacing and laboring, there came a point when I started to veer into empty birthing suites and rooms with signs that read staff only. I found a room with a sweeping view of the Salt Lake Valley and went straight to the window. Leaning hard on its sill, I stared through the glass at a moon just shy of full. I wondered then if all things lunar, the ghostly light, the tug of tides, were having their way with those of us on the floor, and why not, since that orbiting chunk of rock affects navigation, migration, and yes, reproduction in so many species. Perhaps the moon's pull was the one reason my water had broken the day before, 1 month too soon, on a white designer couch belonging to some friends. I'd just returned from a walk along the faint shoreline of an ancient lake that during the last ice age lapped at the foothills of the Wasatch Mountains, which stand like ramparts on the eastern edge of Salt Lake City. At one time, Lake Bonneville filled the whole valley. It also covered much of northern Utah, southern Idaho, and eastern Nevada, which it turns out are exactly the places my family quote-unquote settled. I've hiked many parts of the 100-mile-long Bonneville shoreline trail, but on the day my water broke, I was on the section just above the University of Utah, my alma mater. I'd walked south toward the mouth of Emigration Canyon, through which tens of thousands of Mormons, my ancestors included, entered the valley in the mid to late 19th century. It was there, quite near the spot where church leader Brigham Young said famously that this valley was the right place, that I grew breathless. My pulse pounded in my throat and behind my eyes. Only then did I realize I'd gone too far, that getting back to the car might prove impossible. Hands on knees, I panted and waited for things to settle down. In the meantime, I looked out at the valley where the city unfurled in every direction and tentacled the land. How much my hometown had grown in the 4 years since my father's suicide, when I packed up and headed south to Utah's Red Rock country. And the air, so polluted now, everything hued in sepia like a photo taken long ago. I tried to imagine Lake Bonneville beneath the city's overlay. This wasn't hard, since its remnant, the Great Salt Lake, still shines plainly near the city. And maybe it was the sweat that brined my eyes, coupled with the thrash of sky-high blood pressure that caused a vision to seize me. The scrim of tar, brick, and steel peeling away from the land to reveal a substrate of gray-green hardpan. Scattered across the parched lake bed's expanse were countless bones, as if containing every kind of animal that ever lived there, from the earliest marine life to extinct dinosaurs to exiled wolves and bison. Some bones were fossilized. Some were bleached and porous, drained of minerals and marrow. Others were denser, newer. From the most recent, strings of sinew still dangled. I wiped my eyes and looked again, though I wish I hadn't. The vision persisted. Among the bones were human skulls, scattered for miles, like dice thrown across a felted table. Empty eye sockets gawked at the soiled sky, lipless teeth grinned garishly at the ground. My blood turned cold, reptilian. I turned and trundled back to the car as fast as I could. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was close behind. But every time I turned to look, there was only the slight shiver of brush, a bit of kicked up dust. I ran through the possibilities. Cougar? Coyote? Serial killer? I'd been stalked by both animals and men. This was neither. It would take years, 2 decades to be exact, to understand that what trailed me that day was more akin to a ghost herd or a shadow pack. Who knew the past could creep up like that en masse, like some haunted, hungry horde? But my body's response was vivid and visceral. If I couldn't stay out in front of this thing, whatever it was, I'd either be trampled or consumed. An hour later, back in the city, I collapsed onto my friend's white couch and pressed a tall, cold glass of water to my forehead. I never took a sip. Right then, a geyser burst between my legs, nearly 4 weeks ahead of schedule. My first thought, bring it on. My second thought, run.
Now we're gonna invite questions from all of you, and then Jake is gonna read us out with some poems from horses, and then quick like rabbits, they're going to come down to the book signing table, where they will sign books. All 5 of these books are available. These are thanks to the King's English Bookshop in Salt Lake City, hooray, hooray, from Milkweed, and all 3 of these from Jordan Hills Press. So join the conversation. What questions do you have about writing, about process, about the works of Pam, Jake, and Amy?
Somebody's up there.
Yes. Over on this side, yeah. Thank you.
How do you write about a devastating period of your life from a point where you're healed? What is the dynamic like between that, the being a healed person writing about a really horrible time?
The question is, how do you write about a really horrible or difficult time from the vantage point of being on the other side of that, right? Of
Yeah.
kind of being healed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and are you pointing that to all 3?
Sure.
Love it. How do you write about difficulty, trauma, trouble from kind of the other side of it?
Healed is the problem in that sense for me, you know. I mean, I think being alive is healing, you know, I think I'm healing all the time, but I wouldn't declare myself healed. How I write, you know, I'm a writer who likes to push on the bruise, you know, like that's a thing I've always liked. And to me, getting all that ugliness out from under the bed and up to the light is the healing, you know. Apologies to my class who heard this already, but in a room that I had the privilege to be in, Barry Lopez said, we're pattern makers. And if our patterns are true enough, they'll have the power to bring someone for whom the world has become chaotic and disorganized up from their knees and back to life. So for me, like, the writing is in part the healing. And then my very simple writer teacher answer is nouns. I do it with nouns. I do it with the stuff of the trauma, like, you know, whatever it is, you know, the curtains, the Coke bottle, you know, the way the light was coming through the window, like just with the sensory stuff of it.
Fantastic. Jake, any thoughts?
Oh, it sounded more like a question for, you know, essayists, I think. I think poetry, I'm in a world where obscurity is something, obscuring something is the way in which you develop a kind of distance, right? So I think anything unanswered could be, you write poetry. Right?
Fantastic.
Well, apologies to my class too, because we talked about this today, but you know, the brain, we evolved with this negativity bias that is always there trying to protect us from harm, which includes, in the modern day, the thing that already happened. So don't look at that, don't think about it, don't talk about it, stay safe. And that negativity bias has really hurt us because nobody's healing, nobody's talking about the things that need to be talked about. And if we can sort of just learn to see that the negativity bias is trying to protect us, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't write or speak about the things that are difficult, then we start to see that part of the brain is telling you this very bad part of the story. And it's not to say that terrible things haven't happened, but there are also extraordinary things that happen in terrible moments. Some part of your brain is finding a way through. Some part of your brain is finding some sort of possibility, and maybe you just survive that day, but then you live to have another day, and we are still alive. And so I feel like learning to understand that that voice is trying to, I mean, literally sometimes dissociate you from the very thing that you need to be telling the story about, then you have more space in the brain to see what else is possible in that story, what might be possible. We talked today about this beautiful moment. And do you remember the movie from the 90s, Life is Beautiful? About Nazi-occupied Italy and a Jewish bookseller who is taken captive with his wife and son, and he's separated from his wife. He hides his son, and he tells his son he's gonna make this into a game, and they're just gonna play hide and seek with these bad guys, but they're winning. And his goal is to just protect this child from the terrible, terrible things that are happening around them. And there's this incredible moment where all these Italian Jewish men are in their prison garb, and they're carrying their work tools, or they're, and they're trudging through the street, and there's a loudspeaker with the German guy in charge barking orders in German, and the men walking through the streets are just so, of course, hopeless and downtrodden, and just looking at the ground and just shuffling on. And there's this one man pushing a wheelbarrow, and the boy is hidden under the burlap, and it's so great because you know it because the boy has the hiccups. So you don't forget that there's actually this little human being under there. And the man is looking around for what's possible in that moment. And in that moment, he sees the open door into where the loudspeaker is, where the radio and the mic are. He sees nobody's in there. He sneaks the boy in there, and he gets on the loudspeaker, and in Italian, he starts telling this love story, this fairy tale, which is actually about the first night that he and his wife went on a date and fell in love. And then the camera goes to the women in their part of the work camp, and she recognizes his voice, she recognizes the story. The other women are transported for a moment, and then the little boy gets on and says, "Yeah, and we are winning this game, like we are ahead with points." And she hears her child's voice, and it's enough to get everybody through the day. It's a terrible, terrible situation, but this man spends his entire time looking for what's possible, what little slight moment there is, when everybody else is sort of given into this survival part of the brain. And of course, they have every right to be there, but I think about that as we're faced with mounting atrocities in this country, and the ways we might continue to see what's possible and truly embrace the idea that joy is the resistance.
Right back there.
This question's for you, Pam. In Deep Creek, in your fire essay, that structure is so powerful of the feeling of disillusionment, of separation, having to be in all these different places with wildfire happening. How did the process of writing that essay and creating that structure work?
I'm gonna do my best at repeating this super fantastic question. So the question is directed to Pam about her recent super fantastic memoir, Deep Creek. In Deep Creek, there's a fire essay, and the question is about the structure and kind of the disillusionment that is embedded in that. Am I kind of getting that right?
Yes, how did that process of establishing that structure, finding it,
how did the process of establishing that structure, how did that happen? How did you do that, Pam?
That was my last 60 pages. Was not so warmly received. No, it's just for instance, I mean, it shows you time, you know, I turned that book in 2018, and my editor said, nobody who doesn't live in the West gives a shit about wildfires. So things have changed. No one outside of the Rocky Mountain West gives a shit about wildfires. Anyway, what I wanted from that essay, what I really wanted, because you know, a lot of us were kind of new to that, like now there's like watch duty, right? Like now we can get information on a fire in less than a half a second if we have the right apps. But back then, it was sort of the National Forest website and a whole lot of language that we had to learn. And so the way that I put that essay on the page was trying to mirror my own experience of trying to understand what was happening, trying to read through the National Forest Service jargon, which is, you know, they can, like the government can make anything sound like it's not that bad, right? And so there was all this language on there, like I had to look up what the words meant, and so that's where we got the dictionary definitions. Like I wanted to create the experience of someone who was afraid their land was gonna burn down, you know, that their home was gonna burn down, and what they had to try to stay informed were these super specialists speaking a language that was obscuring on purpose. So, like, I wanted the reader to come along with me and be the detective, you know, going, okay, what is a fusée? Or, you know, what do these 17 acronyms actually stand for? And so, I wanted the reader to have the process of discovery. And, you know, what's true about the end of that 2013 fire, the West Fork fire, which was massive and came very close to my home 3 different times in the various ways it kept burning. Like, by the end, I felt much less afraid of fire because I had learned fire, but it was an active learning. I had to go looking for all that information. And so I wanted the essay to mirror that experience. Plus, I was teaching here and there, so I was away from the fire, so I couldn't look out the window and see the fire. I had to follow it on the frickin' app, you know, and see the fire line and see the containment line, and is it 2% or 20%, and then, you know, after we were like married to those containment numbers, then we had a public meeting and the fire supervisor said, don't get married to your containment numbers. I was like, we are already, it's too late. We will have to divorce them because we are so married to our containment numbers. Do not say that to us. We've been like living by them. So it was such a process of learning and of decoding a system and a language that is meant to keep the, you know, the lay person out. And so I wanted to recreate that experience of learning a new language, basically, in addition to telling about the fire.
Wonderful. One more question?
This question's for Amy. You wrote such a personally and politically vulnerable book with Trespass. And I'm curious what feels the same and different about this follow-on book that's coming out this fall.
Question is to Amy, noting that with Trespass, with Amy's first book, it was a profoundly personal and political book. And how is that different, or how is that the same with Almost Animal coming out now? Personally and politically, right? Okay.
When Trespass was first released, and we were living in Southwest Colorado, not far from the Utah border, and I started getting the crank calls, hate calls, and I got really scared. And I remember calling Terry Tempest Williams, who happened to be teaching a class at Westminster, and she sent the class out and went into a broom closet and like talked me off the ledge. Well, she didn't really, she actually kept me on the ledge because she said, Amy, they're gonna wanna kill you. And that was like a really Okay, baptism by fire. And sure enough, I had a pretty scary stalker at the first few events in Utah. And then Desert Cabal, which I wrote from such a tender heart and was so surprised at the hate they got. But by all the right people. So that was fine. It also seemed to really help a lot of people who didn't have the same experience in wilderness that Abby had. And so that was also really putting me in the hot seat. So I feel like I've been getting reforged, and now here we are, going back into Utah at a time when political violence against artists is worse than ever. Charlie Kirk was shot, and this book is very anti-gun. It involves, my evolving thinking about gun and gun violence. And so I don't know. What's changed is that, like Pam already said, I'm not afraid anymore. This is what I'm here for. And whatever it takes to change this world and make it fair and equitable and to save what's left and take care of one another, I don't care what happens to me. I'll be glad to be there to do whatever needs to be done. And at the same time, Pam and I are going together to do our Utah gigs, and we're really glad to be doing it together because it really is scary to be going alone. Yeah.
Yeah, when Without Exception came out, it was the first time that the venues hired police to come and armed police to come and stand at the doors. And that was not my request, that was their decision. Not in every case, but in many cases, like in these sweet little towns. And yeah, I think there's an awful lot of women, people, there's an awful lot of humans, our age-ish, she's younger than me, but not by that much, who are just like, I feel like I'm in the bonus. I'm in the bonus. I had a great life. And the alternative is to be quiet and afraid. And that's not possible,
And it won't protect you.
It won't protect. Your silence will not protect you. Audre Lorde. I took a woman down the river who had that tattooed on her arm. I can still see her arm every time I say it. Your silence will not protect you.
Thank you, all three. It's been a conversation of durability and joy and reforging that has given me a lot to think about and a lot to appreciate about your work and your careers. Jake, I'm always excited about really great blurbs, and
That's quite the blurb list.
And it's quite the blurb list that we have here for horses. I just want to set you up with this gorgeous blurb from Ada Limon. With its gorgeously wrought poems that both eulogize and praise, Horses is a singularly stunning collection. Skeets is a poet singing back to the often frightening world how lucky we are to overhear this awestruck music. Jake, will you please read us out?
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Yeah, I ask, and I'm so grateful that these artists and poets decided to learn to play. I'll read us out. I'll read just a couple of works to give you an idea of the collection. But I first want to thank my family. They drove out here from the res and from Vegas. So yeah, so this is the first official, reading of From Horses. It's great that it's here, and it's great that it's on the Colorado Plateau. It's near home, and yeah, surrounded by all you fine folks and my family. So it's really great. So I'll read just 2 poems here, and I'll read 2 more shorter ones, and I'll be done. This one's called From Autumn. I wonder the language of light on a late morning walk in what feels like the desert willow of winter. Ash flow, bellow tough, velvet mesquite. The mountain in the distance, the color of the world. Wind is the language of sky, heard through sentences, through tumbleweeds. What is water if not the sky looking at itself? A warbler sees itself in me, in my throat, or am I just the trick of light ran rampant through a whisper of river, something made alive by voice? But what is voice if not wind? A low lake, collide, joy, wit, wing, joy, only morning. And now let me explain in Nao. The moon is a penny. I carry with me an empty notebook meant for the coming clouds. The pages held between the breaths of the silver I feel choked and collapsed when I walk on damp wood chips and frozen mud. I walk between two houses in favor of the other. And by the time I reach one, it's near noon. And there's a rabbit cloaked in sawdust, murmuring through a snowy field. Not a bird in the sky, only the face of memory, all the colors of every single morning. And this is called, let me find it real quick. This poem is called If Hope, What Then of Its Body? If hope, what then of its body? In a field of wild grasses, with colors only known in memory, we watch children grow up with salt held in their hands. They show us first that mud is baptismal. Mud can be new skin. But mud swallows even the most sacred sometimes. If hope, what then of its body? Horsegrass, lake waves, evening light, hummingbirds, a barn door the new moon pressed shut. And I'll end with the first two parts of the opening poem, which is also the title poem, Horses. So the book opens with a 12-part poem, and I wrote it in response to a Goodreads review of Eyes Bottle Dark. Someone on Goodreads posted, and it's still there, you can read it, that Jake Skeets is not a poet that writes long work, and that Eyes Bottle Dark is a normal poetry collection, but just cut in half. And so I then said, oh, well, I'll write a long poem, I'll write a long sequence poem, just to prove that person wrong. So I dedicate this poem to them. So again, this Horses is a 12-part poem, opens up the book, and I'll read just the first two parts. Horses. Part 1, Carrier. First, the sky pronounced on red soil its want to be more holy, to be more whole. Its promise, its gesture like a rock up a gentle slope, or one long body wrapped around a map, a curved mirror. It carries time and emissions shifted through scattered grasses over a 6 to 9 month period, a hum, a drift, aloft, alone, a gallery of altitudes, and at any given time a field of regard, a field of snow, a field of too much length. There, a wasp, a glottis, a stirring of teeth, the letters we carry over the spit of high moon and morning coffee, somewhere in a canyon on the roadway, a sudden river washing away God. We become lightning sometimes, and there, only then becomes song, carry our ache, its kick, pull, haul, hull, become dark cattle, a body of water, the mouth around light, dark clouds leaping into a cold wind. Part 2, apocalypse. There has been no rain, and we monster hot afternoons in narrow hollows, meadows green and sweep over memories of dew, and shorelines now rust and golden with sweat from dry wild weeds. Lakelets, heads thrown back, steel beams and all. There we trace the outline of bay horses in our legs, and the red rocks on the backs of ladybugs. Our hands smell of burning coal, sauntered foxlight and elk-born winters. Birds still sing, and from the jaw of a pale sky, dark clouds kneel like you would a shadow. There are ways nature plants a mirror, so each hill and heat burst look the same. Between the ways, time has a body, into layers of skin, each of different shade or century. A reel of vowels with different faces reflect the sun in new light every time. There, each new eternity collapsed into mineral strata on a canyon wall in winter droughts, as in a mirror touching time like it would our bodies, dreaming our bodies.
Kate, Pam, Amy, thank you for your work. Thank you for sharing your work this evening. It's just been a complete joy and honor. And join us at the signing table.
Thanks, hon.